You got to get up right now. Turn the system up.
This is Speak Out Now. We are a revolutionary socialist group. You can read and learn more on our website, speakoutsocialists.org. These are the reports from the week of June 27th. 5 days after the collapse of a condo in Surfside, Florida, 150 people are still unaccounted for, and 11 have been confirmed dead. While viewers around the world were stunned to see video footage of the seemingly sudden crumbling of the 12-story building, engineers had expressed concern about the condo's major structural damage nearly 3 years before the deadly collapse. During a 2018 inspection, a consultant recommended repair work on the pool deck and underground parking garage, which had abundant cracking and crumbling. Without such repairs, the deterioration would only expand exponentially. Yet weeks after this report, residents of the building were told that it was safe. What the report also made clear was that the correct repairs would be extremely expensive. And while the condo board had taken out $12 million in loans, the recommended repairs had never been made. Due to this negligence, the price was raised even higher. People paid with their lives. This horrific and deadly accident should have never happened, and it could have been prevented if safety in the face of major structural damage had been taken seriously.
Over 700 nurses employed at the St. Vincent Hospital in Worcester, Massachusetts, have been on strike for 114 days. This is the longest strike in the history of the state, and one of the longest in the country. Nurses are protesting what they consider to be unsafe staffing practices, and are demanding that Tenet, the company that owns and runs St. Vincent Hospital, institute safe staffing ratios, which would include a 1-to-4 nurse-to-patient ratio on the medical surgical floors. Nurses are also demanding that staffing be ensured so that nurses are not forced to do overtime to cover for lacking staff. So far, Tenet has refused to agree to these demands and has spent millions of dollars hiring replacement nurses, paying for the transportation for these replacement nurses, and hiring extra security staff to manage the pickets. Prior to the strike, the nurses at St. Vincent had filed over 600 unsafe staffing reports, where they stated that the current staffing levels were jeopardizing the safety of their patients. Tenet has no excuse to block the request for more staffing, since it reported a profit of over $70 million the year prior to the strike. There are no federal nurse-to-patient ratios that protect patients and nurses. California is the only state in the country with such a law. Due to this, hospitals across the country can force nurses to take care of an unsafe number of patients. The Nurses Union in California has released numerous reports showing how the safe nurse-to-patient ratio law in California has saved the lives of thousands of patients throughout the years. What the nurses at St. Vincent are demanding is not only necessary in Massachusetts, but it should be a rule for all hospitals in the country.
An ITV News investigative report discovered that an Amazon warehouse, also known as a fulfillment center, in Dunfermline, Scotland, destroys hundreds of thousands of stock items every week. Video footage obtained by an undercover reporter reveals hundreds of thousands of unsold items being earmarked for destruction. Some of the goods are returned items in good condition, but many more are still in their original wrappers, removed directly from the stock shelves. The items range from unused COVID masks to jewelry and television sets, and even computers. The report revealed that this one center targets 130,000 items to be destroyed every week. This practice is not limited to this warehouse. Amazon has 110 fulfillment centers in the US and another 185 worldwide where this is common practice. Consider the amount of waste and the price of this waste. If we assume 130,000 items per week targeted to be destroyed at each fulfillment center, with 295 of these centers around the world, that is over 38 million items destroyed every week, ending up in landfills all around the world. These items are made from trees, from rare metals found deep under the earth, wrapped in plastic. People who work in mines risk their lives just to have enough money to buy food, while their work poisons them and their environment. The trees that were cut down for no purpose put us all at risk by decreasing the carbon they stored in their trunks and branches and this increases the carbon dioxide in the environment and exacerbates global warming. The shipping of these products to these fulfillment centers from all over the world uses up huge quantities of fuel, and all of this production is then thrown into the landfill. Why would Amazon do this? These distribution centers are located strategically very close to the population it serves. Amazon charges fees to any manufacturer for housing its products this close to a majority of consumers so they can assure speedy delivery. The longer the product sits on the shelf, the more rent the manufacturer pays. A business decision is made when the manufacturer's sales aren't paying for the Amazon stocking fees. If it doesn't sell quickly, it is cheaper to destroy the stock than to pay for storage, especially if the manufacturer is overseas and shipping back to the manufacturer is costly. Amazon wants to empty those shelves to make more space for the hot commodity of the day. Think toilet paper in the early days of the pandemic. The Earth's resources and human labor that went into making this product is just tossed aside because the goal is profit, not meeting our needs. This practice is a perfect illustration of the madness of the profit motive, which the defenders of capitalism tell us is the only incentive that exists for production. What if society was structured with needs determining what gets manufactured where and how? Would a democracy of the producers allow such a wasteful practice? We could easily dispose of the owners who collect money from this process and decide what we need and how to distribute it. That's socialism.
The Democrats' attempt to pass the For the People Act through the U.S. Senate failed last week when Republicans threatened to use the infamous filibuster to stop legislation that doesn't have the support of at least 60 senators. The legislation would have done a few basic things to encourage people to vote and to discourage voter suppression. It would expand the right to vote through automatic registrations, allow the federal government more power to intervene against obvious voter suppression, make election days a federal holiday, expand early voting and mail-in ballot provisions, limit gerrymandering, which is the manipulation of electoral district boundaries, and better regulate campaign contributions, among other changes. These are all logical reforms to the system. But the Democratic leadership knows very well that because of the filibuster, this legislation will never get through the U.S. Senate, even if all 51 Democrats, including the Vice President, support it. And the Democrats are unwilling to do the one thing that they can do to force the bill through the Senate, use their 51 votes to abolish the filibuster and allow the bill to be debated and voted on with a strict majority vote. At least 2 Democrats, and maybe more, are refusing to allow that to happen, effectively killing the bill. This party can endlessly propose wonderful-sounding laws that they know will never get signed into effect. That's certainly cynical, but let's think about the bigger problem that their bill never addresses: the dominant power of big money and party bosses that shape the nomination process. The bureaucrats and leading politicians of each party are influenced by the big money that corporations and the wealthy dangle in front of them. Both parties maintain their dominance of the media and political structure with the support of huge donations and advertisements from the millionaire and billionaire owners, chief executive officers, and high-level managers of the corporations. Those donations shape the political choices these parties make, and this money keeps their parties dominant in the media and in our daily lives. The 2 capitalist parties choose our candidates for us, and only afterwards do they give us any choice between the 2 evils. In other words, big money chooses our candidates beforehand, no matter how many people manage to successfully vote on election days. The Democratic bill addresses only the superficial symptoms and completely ignores the larger disease, the stranglehold of big money and the capitalist class over every aspect of our political system.
On the 4th of July, the politicians and the corporate media will celebrate their version of the past. It will again be marked by calls for patriotism, and it will be used to justify U.S. policies of domination around the globe. At least that's how those in power like to use this holiday. For the rest of us, at least those of us who get the day off of work, the 4th of July is often just another day to spend time with our families, perhaps barbecue, and if we're lucky, we get to see some fireworks. But it's difficult not to notice the enormous push for patriotism, nationalism, and flag waving that happens on this day. We reprint excerpts from a speech in San Francisco in 1908 by Emma Goldman, an anarchist activist and writer who addresses the simple question, what is patriotism? What is patriotism? Is it love of one's birthplace, the place of childhood's recollections and hopes, dreams and aspirations? Leo Tolstoy, the greatest anti-patriot of our times, defines patriotism as the principle that will justify the training of wholesale murderers, a trade that requires better equipment for the exercise of man-killing than the making of such necessities of life as shoes, clothing, and houses. A trade that guarantees better returns and greater glory than that of the average working man. Indeed, conceit, arrogance, and egotism are the essentials of patriotism. Let me illustrate. Patriotism assumes that our globe is divided into little spots, each one surrounded by an iron gate. Those who have had the fortune of being born on some particular spot consider themselves better, nobler, grander, more intelligent than the living beings inhabiting any other spot. It is, therefore, the duty of everyone living on that chosen spot to fight, kill, and die in an attempt to impose his superiority upon all the others. The inhabitants of the other spots reason in like manner, of course, with the result that, from early infancy, the mind of the child is poisoned with blood-curdling stories about the Germans, the French, the Italians, Russians, etc. When the child has reached manhood, he is thoroughly saturated with the belief that he is chosen by the Lord himself to defend his country against the attack or invasion of any foreigner. It is for that purpose that we are clamoring for a greater army, a navy, more battleships and ammunition. We Americans claim to be peace-loving people. We hate bloodshed. We are opposed to violence. Yet we go into spasms of joy over the possibility of projecting dynamite bombs from flying machines upon helpless citizens. Our hearts swell with pride at the thought that America is becoming the most powerful nation on earth, and that it will eventually plant her iron foot on the necks of all other nations. Such is the logic of patriotism. Thinking men and women the world over are beginning to realize that patriotism is too narrow and limited a conception to meet the necessities of our time. The centralization of power has brought into being an international feeling of solidarity among the oppressed nations of the world. A solidarity which represents a greater harmony of interests between the working man of America and his brothers abroad than between the American miner and his exploiting compatriot. A solidarity which fears not foreign invasion, because it is bringing all the workers to the point when they will say to their masters, "Go and do your own killing. We have done it long enough for you."
upside down. Get up. When I hear that whoop, whoop.
Amazon Prime is the world's second most popular subscription service after Netflix, with 200 million subscribers. The service was introduced in 2005 and has since used the lure of free shipping to create a loyal and huge customer base. Now that Amazon also owns Whole Foods, this loyalty can extend to all of our shopping needs. Amazon has it all. Their explicit goal in creating this corporate holiday was to surpass Black Friday, which before Bezos outdid it was the most frenzied all-you-can-shop holiday. On their History of Prime Day, yes, that is a real thing, Amazon tells us with pride that in 2015, customers bought more items than on Black Friday 2014, which was our biggest Black Friday ever at the time. Prime is a brilliant way to make us pay a fee so that they can tempt us into buying even more stuff. Who can resist the allure of so-called free shipping, even when we know it isn't really free? Capitalist society has been dominated by monopolies or near monopolies like Amazon for over a century. A century ago, The biggest capitalists were called robber barons because workers knew that the wealth of the capitalists is always a stolen product of our labor. The only thing that has changed since is the sheer size of the capitalist corporations. Given how much they own, the economic and political power held by the top dogs like Bezos, Musk, and Gates is unprecedented, and they'll continue to hold these powers for as long as we let them. Who knows? If we let this rotten system continue long enough, maybe Jeff Bezos will become president, and then he can make Prime Day a federal holiday so we can shop non-stop without worrying about the workday getting in the way. That would make it, for him at least, the ultimate capitalist holiday.
June 28th, 2021. Editorial of the Workplace Newsletters of L'Étincelle Fraction of the NPA, translated from French. More than 65% abstained in the second round of regional elections in France. Once again, the pundits commented above all on the rate of abstention. After the first round, there were criticisms of bad citizens who had not made the effort to vote. Now, following the second round, commentators are trying to show an understanding of the abstentionists and to seek explanations for voters' lack of interest. From the malfunctions in the delivery of electoral mail, outsourced by the post office to the company Adrexo, to the psychological shock of a year of pandemic, anything served as a justification for the voters' disavowal of the election. La République en Marche Party, centrist party of President Macron, and Rassemblement National, far-right party, national rally of Marine Le Pen, kept repeating that these were only local elections, but this campaign had all the makings of a presidential election rehearsal. The day after the first round, although the presidential party only got 7% of the national vote, President Macron advertised his casual attitude as he welcomed the pop star Justin Bieber to the Élysée Palace, official residence of the French president. This time around, following the election, Macron did not go to Disneyland, but instead went to Douai, a region marked by unemployment and massive abstention, to praise the electric battery factory industries. Marine Le Pen had scolded her voters for not coming out to vote in the first round. Following the second round, Le Pen was more cautious and thanked those who had made the effort to vote. However, despite the pathetic results of the national rally, we should not be misled. The ideas of the extreme right are still with us. During these regional elections, all the institutional parties used demagoguery to play on safety and the lack thereof, fear and racism. Even Roussel, the head of the Communist Party, has made, quote, security, end quote, central to his platform, and promised not to be, quote, lax, end quote. All of these parties are chasing the extreme right and contributing to the spread of the poisonous ideas. They are trying to sow division and hatred in the working class. However, if the record abstention rate is any indication, these demagogic themes did not make it to regional elections. These ideas are only brandished to make people forget the real problems of the working classes. To the great displeasure of all these fearmongers, it is undoubtedly social insecurity that is the population's main concern. After more than a year of pandemic, with layoff plans and company closures piling up, and with poverty on the rise, people are very worried about the future. At the same time, shareholders' dividends are exploding. There is good reason to be disgusted. But abstention is not enough as a means of protest. We will have to take to the streets again to oppose the injustices of this capitalist system and defend ourselves against the foreseeable attacks. Macron announces that while we wait for the presidential elections, this will not be a lame duck year. Clearly, he is thinking of going back to the drawing board with a pension reform by pushing back the legal retirement age to 64. The announcements on the Social Security deficit deepened by the pandemic and the profits of research labs tell us that we will again be asked to pay the bill. And again, job cuts have been announced in many sectors, such as the automobile foundries, even as economic activity and profits are on the rise. The government is hesitating because it is caught between two fires: the need to show its electorate and the bosses that it is taking back the initiative, and the fear of reigniting a dynamite stick, social struggles. The abstention disrupted their well-oiled electoral system, but it will soon be forgotten. It is by our social anger outside the electoral race and its agenda that we will change the rules of the game.
86 years ago, longshore workers all along the Pacific coast were on strike. The strike began in May 1934 during the Great Depression. At the time, the conditions that existed were brutal. Every day, workers showed up at what they called the slave market, where crew managers would pick their crews for the day. There was no consistent work or pay, shifts were long, dangerous, and hiring practices were discriminatory. Longshore workers were demanding union control of their hiring hall, a coast-wide contract with the same wages and protections, and a 6-hour workday. In San Francisco on July 5th, the Employers Association tried to forcefully open the port. They called in the police and National Guard to open the port using guns and tear gas, injuring and arresting hundreds of strikers and bystanders. This day became known as Bloody Thursday after 2 workers, one a longshoreman, the other a Communist Party organizer and unemployed cook, were killed. In reaction, tens of thousands of workers all over the city stood in solidarity. First in a funeral march, and later, workers walked out in a general strike that lasted for 4 days and brought the whole city to a standstill. The strike came to an end when conservative union leaders called it off, and the longshoremen's fight ended in arbitration. But for the first time in the history of the waterfront, workers had won control of their own union halls. The 1934 strike was also the first time black workers were allowed into the Longshoremen's Union. Historically, the leadership of the union had a racist policy, excluding black workers. Because of the anti-racist leadership of Harry Bridges and other revolutionaries on the waterfront, the longshoremen reached out to the black community and promised that black workers would always have a place on the waterfront. This strike was the first longshore strike in San Francisco in which black workers joined in, helped the strike, rather than taking jobs as strikebreakers. Black workers became integrated into the Longshoremen's Union, and because of worker control of their union hall, longshoremen could guarantee that their black coworkers would have stable hours and jobs. Bloody Thursday and the West Coast Maritime Strike was a struggle. Workers were on the defensive and under attack. The strength of the strike came from the efforts of workers to reach out to others and expand their forces. The San Francisco General Strike is a testament to the strength of working-class solidarity, which allowed the strike to win against all odds. Before the 1960s, California farm workers had no legal right to organize, but their determined struggles beginning in the mid-60s and the early 70s forced the growers in the state of California to recognize their union. Farm workers were often housed on land belonging to the farm owner, keeping them isolated from union organizers. A law passed in California gave union organizers the right to enter the growers' lands so that they could talk to the workers. On July 23rd, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled the California law unconstitutional and gave the farm owners the right to bar union organizers from their lands. The court decided that the Fifth Amendment in the Bill of Rights give property owners the right to keep anyone off their property unless it is open to the public, like a store or a restaurant. Since lettuce farms and other workplaces are not generally open to the public, the court ruled that the government can't pass a law giving union organizers the right to talk to the workers over the objection of the boss. This Supreme Court ruling is nothing new. Property rights are firmly embedded in the Constitution. For example, the Supreme Court long ago ruled that freedom of speech stops at the door of the workplace. Whatever legal rights workers have won have to be framed as exceptions to the general rule that the Constitution gives property owners the right to control on their property. Consequently, the courts have a history of cutting away at workers' rights when they think the workers are too weak to fight back. The big workers' struggles that got unions established were successful because workers were ready to defy unjust laws and face down the police and the National Guard troops that were called out to enforce them. Civil rights laws, including voting rights, were won when black people rose up in mass action. Much of this history is hidden or forgotten, but it's a guide to what we will have to do if anything is going to change for the better.
Turn the system upside down. It's supposed to be